This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane Pittman and Olgun getting you set for this week's NBL Olgs, but also there's so much to look back on from last week. And, some weeks we talk about the drama in the league and most of it is the on-court stuff. And maybe we can build it up a little bit. I don't think we need to for this podcast. This was a crazy weekend. And when you've got a doubleheader on a Thursday, I think it set the stage for everything. But you were there, you were in arenas. This has to be the craziest weekend of the season so far.
Yeah, it was funny. I rocked up. So I'm based back in Sydney now, right? So I rock up to this Wollongong, this Illawarra Hawks Melbourne United game, thinking, all right, cool. This is a good Melbourne United team against the team that's top of the ladder, Illawarra Hawks. This high-powered offensive team against the best defensive team. I'm in for a really good game of basketball, and I think that's what it was. Even though United was missing some key players, I thought it was a really quality game of basketball. And I just thought that I'd rock up and this is a game that I wouldn't have to do anything. I just put my feet up, just watch it. Probably won't have to get anything done after it. Easy. Nope. There was just absolute drama at the end of that game. It was a hilarious atmosphere to be a part of as well. And look, for all of the antics that went on, from the whole Chris Goulding incident to the comments from Justin Tatum and from Jared Novelli after the game, I thought it was a quality game of basketball, and I don't want that to be lost. And if we see a bunch of games between these two teams, I wouldn't be upset about it.
Yeah, it was a great game of basketball, and it's the perfect way to set the stage for this podcast, because we will talk about the punishment for Justin Tatum from the league that came through in the last 24 hours. We'll look at the Sydney Kings, because you started with this game, Melbourne and Illawarra, then you finished the weekend with Sydney losing their second game of this round as well. So the Kings, fascinating questions tied up with that team and some health concerns as well. So the two of the bigger teams in the league, with Melbourne and Sydney, they were a part of the drama. We're going to get to that. Also want to talk about the Perth Wildcats. They had a big win over the Sydney Kings, and Keanu Pinder stood up there. So we're going to praise that man, Montrezll Harrell. We'll talk about him. There is plenty to get to in this podcast, and we still will have some left over. We're going to talk about that on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops Thursday night on ESPN. And make sure you check that out. Olgun's going to be there. We've got a couple of players this week that are joining the show. We're just tying down the details there. So make sure you catch that every Thursday night. Of course, Ryan Brockhoff in studio with me as well. So maybe this is the best way to set this up. So if I asked you what was your favorite game of the weekend, I already don't think that we're going to go down the same path with this, but what game would it be? And perhaps it is that Thursday night game that you were just mentioning.
For me, it was absolutely that Thursday night game, because it was Melbourne United went in without Shea Ili, and while Matthew Dellavedova suited up, he wasn't going to play that game. He went through a warm up and he wasn't going to play. And so this was a team that was missing its two primary initiators, right? It's 2 point guards. So you think, how the hell are they going to get enough points on the board against this Illawarra Hawks team that is currently healthy and is the most high-powered offense we've seen so far, right? They are by far the best offensive team in the league. And so for this United team to stand up defensively against these Illawarra Hawks in Wollongong, and yes, Trey Kell went down with a back injury, but that was an unbelievable defensive effort, especially that second quarter, where they look like the Melbourne United team that I think we all envisioned, which is this one that's connected on a string. It's Jack White being unbelievably dominant on both ends of the floor, and especially on the boards. It's the big stepping up, and it's someone like Flynn Cameron stepping into those minutes that were vacated by the absence of Shilly and Delhi, and just really performing well, being on the front foot offensively, basically neutralizing Tyler Harvey. He really stepped up in both of United's games this week. And this is for all the people out there who said that maybe United doesn't have enough offensive firepower to really get it done, or to go deep in a playoff series or something like that. I think that they still might, but I think what they hold their hat on is obviously what they do defensively. They're the best defensive team in the league right now, and I think that's the thing that I think makes them the championship favorite. We've seen other teams stumble. We've seen little stumbles from United, but I think they're the most organized, well-prepared team in the league, and that's what makes me. They're the team I feel safest with. If I was a fan of them, I'd feel the safest right now.
Yeah, and that's why last week against Southeast Melbourne was so surprising that they did drop the level, whether it was the discipline, whether it was staying focused in that game against a team that they probably should have beaten. That's why it was such a surprise, because the week before on the podcast, I said Melbourne is the most reliable team. And part of the reason why that floor stays so high for this team is because the organization, the coaching, the preparedness of the players, that you can just slot in a Flynn Cameron, and he has 18 points in this game, and he had one of the most important roles in this game with those guards for Illawarra. Obviously, Trey Cole ends up going out late in the first half, I believe that was. And that was a massive blow for this Illawarra team, because we have seen teams right throughout this season. It's one thing to go into a game knowing that you're not going to have a Daly or a Shea Ili, but when you lose a player during a game, it can really throw a team off kilter. And Tyler Harvey wasn't having his best game shooting the ball. He sort of caught fire a little bit late in this game. But even if you look at Melbourne, you spoke about the offense. I don't think it was their best offensive game either. Even Jack White, someone that just hasn't quite found his three-point shot yet, despite the fact that he's been so impactful all over the floor. And in the end, they used, as we've seen so many times before, Chris Goulding going ballistic. He hits the 5 threes. He has 25 points in this game. And I don't think we can talk any more about this without getting to that incident. It feels like it was so long ago now, but as I mentioned, Justin Tatum just did receive a fine from the league. So break down, we can read your story at espn.com.au to find out what happened in the immediate aftermath. But let's fast forward to where we're at now. Why did Justin Tatum get a fine for his post-game comments criticizing the officials?
So, two things to note first. So, as soon as the buzzer sounds, and we've spoken about this before, but the purview is then on. It's then down to Basketball Australia to do the sanction, right? So the NBL is now out of the picture at that point. From buzzer to buzzer, that's the NBL's purview. Beyond that, it's Basketball Australia. So the Basketball Australia Integrity Unit had a look at these comments. They were critical of the officiating, and that was the thing that I think Basketball Australia put a stamp on. They said, "Hey, you can't do that." So Justin Tatum walked away with a $3,000 fine. And I don't know if he was required to make a public apology, but he did put out a public apology, very heartfelt, of course.
Yes.
Didn't apologize to Chris Goulding, who he called out in that press conference. He called out multiple times, I think, which I think is very unusual. We don't see that from a head coach to any player, let alone a player like Chris Goulding. I don't think we would see that from an Australian coach. I think only a foreign coach would sort of just have the guts to do something like that. But he got fined for that, and I think I imagine that is all. We'll see what happens the next time these two teams play. I think Dean Vickerman sort of intimated that Chris Goulding does his talking on the court. It was a really hostile environment for Chris Goulding. Being in that building, the volume of these Wollongong faithful yelling flop at Chris Goulding after that incident was insane, right? I've never seen an entire crowd do that to, I understand an opposing player, but like Chris Goulding's an Olympian and is also the guy that just torched your team. So I think Chris Goulding it's weird. He's sort of leaning into this villain era that he's got, all while Dean Vickerman is talking about wanting Chris Goulding to be remembered as like a Damian Martin, a Mika Vacona, one of these captains of winning teams, which I think ultimately he will be remembered as, but it was a very, very hostile environment in Wollongong, and I can't wait for these teams to play again.
And part of this with Chris Goulding follows on from last week and what went down against Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. And let's face it, the last decade as well. But then early in this game, he steps into, was it Trey Cole at the start of that game where he stepped into him? It was a foul. And I
on
think
the
this
break, and then he bumped into him. It was a professional foul. There's an argument it could have been an unsportsmanlike, but it was a very professional foul.
It was a professional foul, and I don't really care about the foul. Like, I'm not saying I'm outraged by that incident, but it's not so much the foul. It was he fouls and then straight away puts his hands up like, I didn't do anything. And so, that's why opposition fans, like, let's be real about it. That's why opposition fans get so frustrated, because that is the way he carries himself on the floor. Now, I personally don't care, but I can understand why opposition fans get annoyed. And even earlier today, I was listening to SEN and Dean Vickerman was talking to Jules De Stoop, and they were talking about the incident. And Jules asked Dean, would you give Justin Tatum a call about this? And he's like, no, I have in the past, but I don't really feel there's any need to call about this incident in particular. And even Dean said, look, Chris does have a bit of a reputation. So when people see incidents like that at the end of the game, they might straight away jump to the conclusion that it was a big flop. He pointed to the fact that he could have actually seriously hurt himself. Like Chris Goulding with that ankle tweak or hyperextension, whatever it was. I don't know specifically. But no, even Dean understands kind of why there is this narrative around Chris Goulding. He gets it. We all get it. So I don't know why people get so passionate in defending it. We've seen it for so long. And I understand why the opposition fans get annoyed. And my first reaction to watching that incident, and it's part of, not being on the floor, I wasn't there live. I don't know what Chris Goulding was thinking, but when I watch it even now in slow-mo, yes, he did land very awkwardly, and it was a scary landing, and that's why it looks so theatrical at the end. Like that, separate that from the initial contact where he was seeking contact, where his head did snap back. So, you break the incident into two separate occasions, and you can make the decision yourself whether you think it was a flop or not. But Dean is right. People look at it, and in the moment, that's why they think that. And that's why Justin Tatum thinks that as well in that moment. And then he's asked about it 2 minutes after they lose a heartbreaking game. So I understand how it all went down. I don't necessarily think you need to fine him for that, but I knew they were going to do it.
And look, I understand. I appreciate the emotions of the moment in that right after that game, everyone's heated. We see Justin Tatum walk into the press conference room, and Matt Russell, who is awesome at his job, just lobs question after question at him. And we get great answers from Justin Tatum. And so for us, that's great. But let me let you in on a little secret. Chris Goulding is not the only player in the NBL who flops, or who is maligned around the league by people across the NBL for flopping. Tyler Harvey is someone who embellishes contact. Bryce Cotton is someone who definitely embellishes contact. I'm not saying that I don't like flopping, right? That is one of my basketball icks. But I understand if you're a two-guard in the NBL, for example, and you are constantly getting hounded, you are constantly getting hit, and you get no calls, and you feel like the only way you're going to get a call is to embellish contact a little bit. Now, does Chris Goulding do it perhaps a little bit too much? Yeah. Is it a little bit more egregious with some people? Sure. But no one can tell us that Bryce Cotton doesn't embellish contact on a regular basis. No one can tell me that Tyler Harvey doesn't do that. I'm not saying it's completely wrong. I don't love flopping, but I understand it. I appreciate it. So I think everyone's got to get off their high horse. Chris Goulding is not the only guy who flops. I understand that there is a hatred of him by opposing fan bases around the league. I don't know if that's a Melbourne thing, because it's a Melbourne United is a team that succeeds a lot, so it's easier to cut him down. But to claim that he is the only flopper in the league, or he's the one that needs to be made an example of, is very, very weird behavior. This is a widespread thing.
No, but I think that's strange from you, because if you go online and you watch any Perth Wildcats game, the criticism is nonstop on social media. Chris Goulding is not the only player that gets this treatment. But when you are involved in these high-profile incidents multiple weeks in a row and you're called out twice by teams, okay, then that's something that you look at. It doesn't take away from the greatness of Chris Goulding, and it doesn't take away his performance with 25 points. And here's my thing with people that might embellish contact, if that's the word you want to go down. I'm still looking,
flop, but yeah.
Sometimes I feel like it's like, am I in the place to call people floppers?
Those who may slightly embellish contact when contact is given. I understand, yes.
But I'm looking at the officials. And I've said this time and time again. If you're Chris Goulding or you're another player in the league, why wouldn't you do that? Because you know that you're still getting the whistles. So it's on the officials to make the decision and not get sucked into that. And I understand that it's hard in the moment, but this constantly happens. So it's the officials that need to wisen up to this and make their own decisions. And if there are players across the league, and I'm not even naming one player, but if they consistently do this, then all of a sudden they're going to start to be punished for their own actions. And then you can't blame the officials for not blowing a whistle if they suspect that is the case. So I still look at the officials, and with Tatum, this is what annoyed me the most out of this whole entire incident. And this is where he was actually correct, in my opinion. If you look at and listen to the coaches' mics that we hear time and time again, there is language flying left, right, and center. And I get so annoyed when there is a critical moment in the game and the official then decides that they are going to change the result of the game for something that is just, it's so minor. Like, just let it go. Understand the situation. Understand the emotions are high, and don't blow a tech for that situation, because that, in the end, had a huge impact on the game. I thought it was ridiculous, and I thought Tatum had a point. There are a lot of other coaches out there that we hear all kinds of stuff coming through that mic, and at that stage in the game, don't impact the result, please. That's I beg of you.
I agree. And one more thing on that, then one thing on Chris, and then I think we can put a pin on this game. I genuinely think the refs are coming around to not calling a lot of these flops. Um, I think fouls across the league this season are down. I know refs get scouts, and I know that all of these flops would be on them. And I genuinely think, yes, they call some of them, right? And some of them are fouls and flops, right? So we have to separate those two things too. But I think the refs have largely done a decent job of not falling for these players trying to trick them, right? I think one that comes to mind is Will Magnay on rebound attempts. He'll just fall to the floor. He'll just fall straight down. And I think that's on the ref scout to not call that because he just flops to the floor. And so I like that. I like that they don't call that. So that's one thing, right? I do think the refs, yes, they get tricked sometimes, but I think they're slowly getting better at it. The other thing is, it was quite annoying that, and I'm part of the problem here as well, that the incident and all of the drama around the game, I admit when I'm wrong, always. The drama surrounding that game, it did sort of dampen what was an unbelievable performance from Chris Goulding, who, absent Shirley and Delhi, said, I'm going to go play. This guy played 33 minutes in this game. His body is not in a position where he should be playing 33 minutes in a game in a week where United has 2 games in it, right? But he played 33 minutes in this game. He was 5 of 11 from 3. United was a plus 11 with him on the floor. He had 25 points in this one. He basically said, this is an important game for us. This is the best team in the league right now. I'm going to put this team on my back. I'm going to lift them offensively. The fact that he was able to be on the floor for 33 minutes and this team was super effective defensively is a really good sign for this United team. And what I liked about it was United just kept running their actions. Nothing went to hero ball. They just continued to get through their stuff, and I think they wore out the Illawarra Hawks defense. And that was the most impressive thing about it. It was Chris Goulding really stepping up. It was Jack White pulling down 19 rebounds in this game. It was an incredible week for Jack White. Like, this was a really impressive performance from Melbourne United. I understand it was overshadowed by the drama, but let's not take away from the fact that, yes, United blew out Cairns at the end of the week, and people will dismiss that performance because Cairns was missing a lot of players and it was United at home. I get that. That was a game they were supposed to win. But this was an unbelievably, this is maybe the most impressive win of the season so far.
And to wrap it up, this is consistent across all leagues. The best players that draw fouls, that continually destroy your team, they become villains because they're so great. And there's no doubt that there is part of that with Chris Goulding. So he's going to continue to annoy the opposition, I'm sure. But like you pointed to, some of the shot making just absolutely absurd in this game against the Hawks. And now Melbourne have got the Sydney Kings to start this round as well. Now, if that game was in Sydney, I would be fascinated to know the attention from the crowd, but it is in Melbourne. So maybe some home comforts for Melbourne United and Chris Goulding. They did go on to beat the Cairns Taipans by 43 points. It is time now for PointsBet built different. And if we stick early in the round, Olgun, I thought there was only one man to go to, and it was Montrezll Harrell in this win for Adelaide over Cairns in overtime. 36 points, 16 rebounds, 5 blocks. He was 3 for 3 from the floor. And remember early in the season when I said, look, in some of these close games for Adelaide, just playing Montrezll Harrell more minutes, you will probably win that game. He played 41 minutes in this game in the win over Cairns. He was unbelievable.
Montrezl Harrell with spacing and for some reason with single coverage. If you're just going to guard Montrezl Harrell one-on-one with a Calder Gack or Kyron Galloway, that's you're planning your own funeral at that point. He looked like he was playing at a different speed to everyone else out there on both ends of the floor. You couldn't fake him out because he would block you. He'd read what you were about to do. Offensively, he knew where his spots are. He speaks to players around the league. He is so strong, right? And again, we can't dismiss the fact that this is a guy who was a legitimate rotation NBA player not that long ago, and he's only 30 years old. So once he started to get his feet under him, once he started to get his fitness back, we knew that he could be a dominant player in the NBL. Right now, that's what he's looking like. I wonder what they're going to do going forward as far as playing the two bigs together, because I think Montrezl Harrell with spacing, or Isaac Humphries with spacing, is what works best. But I look at Montrezl Harrell and I think this is someone who can open the floor for everybody else. If he can continue to be this dominant, then I think that opens up everybody else's game in Adelaide.
We've seen Montrezl Harrell buy into the idea of Adelaide. In some ways, we've seen him take a back seat. We've seen him facilitate. We've seen him play whatever role is required coming off the bench. This was the first time in the NBL we saw him against a team that was depleted, a team that had foul trouble, a team that had an undersized front court. And he just said, look, I'm too good. You have no one that can physically stop me. And he went on a dominant run. This was a game that Adelaide were down by 19 points in the first half. Without Montrezl Harrell, they're probably down 30 and they don't win. So Montrezl Harrell was unbelievable in this game. It's so fun to have him in the league. That is PointsBet built different.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
You are listening to the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane, Pittman, Olgun, Ulrich. Don't forget to go to espn.com.au for all the latest news across the NBL. Our man here, Olgun, breaking all the news you need, all the latest reports, everything on the website there. And make sure you check out Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops on ESPN Thursday nights leading into the hoops. And you can usually find the full episode on YouTube there as well. It's a good show we're building. Ryan Brockhoff has been outstanding in studio. So make sure you go and check that out. Hey, I want to get to Sydney, but before we do, this is just, I like to just bring up random events that I take note of. And with that Adelaide Cairns game, look, I don't want to come across like I'm just picking on the officials here. I don't want to get a fine from Basketball Australia, but that was a game that went to overtime. And I'm not saying that the officials got this wrong. I'm just saying that I have a real problem with this rule if it is the case. And maybe you have some intricacies that you can fill me in on here, because I was sending text messages out to a few people saying, what is going on here? Because the broadcast didn't mention this. I didn't see anything online. So there's 3 minutes and 3 seconds to go in Adelaide Cairns. Cairns are leading 81-78. Kendrick Davis knocks down a three. And as he knocks down the three to tie the game, he is called for a leg kick. Now, I can't wrap my head around the idea that if you're called for an offensive foul for kicking your leg out, that they say, yes, that was an illegal maneuver that you made on the shot attempt. You kicked your leg out before you even touched the ground. So before you landed, this was not a foul that was after the shot. It was in the shot. And you're telling me you're going to count the basket and then just give the ball to the opposition on the sideline? Please tell me how that makes sense, because I didn't see anyone even saying this is ridiculous, but that is an absurd rule. And I'm told that if the ball's out of the hands, it doesn't matter. It's in the shot attempt. And this was a game that went to overtime. If I'm a Cairns fan, I'm just so pissed off that this can happen. Why are you counting the basket if someone is committing an offensive foul on the shot? Please. Well, why is that the rule?
This has been a rule in FIBA for a little bit. You generally don't see it on 3-point attempts. You generally see it on drives to the rim, where someone will drive to the rim, get a shot up. Generally on floaters, they'll get a floater up, and then they'll hit the man who has successfully drawn a charge. And because the shot got off already, you count the bucket, and that contact happened after the shot attempt, right? You count crazy? Both plays, right? But then so where I think your issue is when we think about like and ones, for example, you think about where the shot attempt began, right? And that's how you determine whether a player gets shots or whether it's a side out, right? So in this instance, theoretically, the shooting motion begins. Your argument would be that as soon as the shooting motion begins, if illegal contact happens in the midst of that motion, then that should be calculated as a singular thing, right? Where, okay, the illegal contact happened in the middle of that shooting motion. You made illegal contact. We should now void whatever comes from that shooting motion.
Yes.
That's not how FIBA has been historically. FIBA has always been, if the shot gets up before the contact, then you count both things as separate events. Is there an obvious inconsistency in those two things as far as counting two different things as singular events when thinking about a foul being drawn and a shot going up versus determining when a shot begins to determine if someone's going to shoot two free throws? Yes, there is an inconsistency there. I don't think, and I don't know if 40 would even say that this is the thing that cost them the game. No. I think there's a good argument that the shot went off just as he was kicking his leg out. So I don't know. I don't have strong feelings on it.
So, but this is the thing. Like, why can it be one thing for offense and the other thing for defense? So, if the official decided that the defender landed in the landing space,
let me say this. Sorry, I'm gonna cut you off. If someone was going for a dunk and they put an arm out right into someone's face, we wouldn't count that dunk, would we?
No.
Okay, I agree with you then. Yeah, it's the same. The same logic applies.
Yeah, the same logic applies. And if that defender on Kendrick Davis gets in his landing space, or they determine that he hits the body after the shot, he's shooting one. Like that is the way they call it. Like they call it if you get in a shooter's landing space, they will call the flagrant or whatever it may be. And like again, I can get confused from NBA to FIBA rules. But what I'm saying is the defenders are asked to follow different rules to the offensive players, and it's 3 points. It's a 3 points for an illegal shot motion. Like that's what I can't wrap my head around. But anyway, by the letter of the law, I don't think it's wrong, but just that it felt wrong as I was watching this happen that you could count it, because the commentators thought it was and one. They thought it was going to be a 4-point play, and then they realized, no, we've counted the basket, but we've given the ball to Keanu. So no, I'm not saying it cost them the game, but I just think that's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It was important. It gave Adelaide the lead, their first lead in a while, right? And again, once you connect it to the idea of someone going for a layup or a dunk and using an off arm to fend off, I think it's the same. I think it's the same idea. If you're not going to count that bucket, you probably shouldn't count that bucket.
Totally agree. Anyway, let us know what you think about that. Am I just?
I like when you get worked up.
Am I going into a rabbit hole that is just unnecessary for my mental health? Let us know on the social pages. I want to get to the Sydney chat, but just quickly, Keanu Pinder, and this is something I brought up a little bit earlier in the podcast, the idea of being prepared to play without a star. And I think too often we see this Wildcats team, they're just like, Bryce has got us. We know Bryce is going to take over the game. Bryce is our guy. And they don't have the aggression across the board. Keanu Pinder, I asked a few weeks ago on the podcast, what is he in the league? Is he a star? And this is the reason why I asked the question, because you see a game where he has 30-plus points. And by the way, they weren't necessarily always directly guarding each other one-on-one, but it was a marquee matchup when you got Pinder, you got Cooks. And Pinder, to have that type of performance, and from the first minute in this game, this was a different level of aggression. And I've said, I don't know. Is he suffering still from the concussion stuff and obviously the facial injuries he's had? I don't know. There hasn't been anything reported or anything said. So you have to assume that he's okay. But he also went through some real physicality in this game, whether it was running through defenders on the way to the basket, whether it was Tyler Robertson sliding under him for the charge. And that was a really scary fall to the floor. And he didn't let it bother him. He just physically dominated this game from start to finish. And now the question is Keanu Pinder going to do this 3 out of 4 weeks, or is it going to be 1 out of every 4? Because that changes what this Perth Wildcats can do. This has been my whole thing the whole way. That was a big win over a Sydney team that's in trouble. But Pinder was awesome. I just want to see it more often.
It's always been the problem with Pinder, the thing that you mentioned, which is he will show up every second game, basically. And this season, every third game. So in this one, I think when Keanu realizes how athletic he is, when he knows to use his athleticism, I think he's so good, right? And I think that's what he did in this game. I think the matchup was favorable to him. Sydney doesn't have a ton of size, so he was able to get on the rim. I thought the Wildcats guards did a really good job of finding him on rolls. Ben Henschel, I don't think scored a bucket, but he had 8 assists in this one. Some of the point guard chops from some of these guys on the Wildcats was really impressive, and they found Keanu, and he made big shot after big shot. I don't trust the 3-ball to fall consistently, but when he's feeling it like that, he's going to continue to get that shot up, and it'll go in from time to time. But I thought he did really well in a matchup that I think he was looking forward to. You could tell that he really cherished that matchup against Xavier Cooks, to the point where it was the most obvious thing was at the end of that game, Keanu Pinder driving right into Xavier Cooks' chest. I think everyone around Australia forecast that play. But I thought Keanu Pinder was really good. Can he do this consistently from game to game, especially if Cotton is going to miss a considerable amount of time, especially if Ty Webster is out for a little bit? I don't know if the Wildcats can just rely on these guys to get them wins consistently. Yes, the Kings are sort of flailing a bit, but they're still a quality team. So this was a good win for that Wildcats team. It kept them at bay, right? Because a loss there would have felt a little bit scary for them, dropping into the hole of whatever record they would have been on. But I thought it was really impressive from them. And from this game as well, I don't know what a block and a charge is. There are a lot of block charges in this game that got reviewed that I don't know what things are sometimes. I thought Kelly Leaupepe drew a very reasonable charge. I thought Tyler Robertson did too. I don't know the rules sometimes. When you slow things down, I think things just get out of whack. But I don't know.
They're really tough. There's obviously challenges on those players. The one thing I will say, now I'm starting to get paranoid. I've spoken too much about rules, but I don't like.
You're gonna get an angry call from Scott Butler this afternoon.
Yeah, I know. Well, if he calls me Australian number, he'll have some troubles getting onto me, so I might be safe there. Tyler Robertson, that particular charge, where Pinder is airborne, then you slide under him. I personally don't like that. I like the fact that that was a block because that is dangerous. I'm not saying it was intentionally a dangerous play, but that's really, really dangerous. When you've got a guy in the air and you're still sliding under him, that was a scary fall. We've seen guys hurt arms and whatnot on that fall. So I was happy with that one. I think those ones should be pretty clear cut. If you've got a guy airborne and you slide under him, and it happens quickly, so not any issues with the officials there. They made the right call in the end, but that was a pretty scary play. I was glad Keanu Pinder was okay. And hey, they've got 2 games this week now. You talk about can the Perth Wildcats back it up undermanned? Illawarra Hawks come to Perth this Friday night, so I can't wait for that one. Let's see if they can perform again, because that was a big win over Sydney. Let's get to Sydney though. You go first, and maybe let me just ask about Jaylen Adams and this back injury. Gorge discussed it in the post-game press conference after the loss to New Zealand. I might have been half asleep, but did I see you tweet something that perhaps it's not as serious as what it sounded in that press conference? What can you tell us about Jaylen Adams?
Yeah, I think so. In the press conference, Gorge mentioned something along the lines of, Jaylen Adams won't be himself for a while. Like my impression is that Jaylen Adams could very well play next week.
Okay.
Is there would there be a back injuries are very precarious, so there will more than likely be some sort of return to play situation, whether that's a minutes restriction, whether it's maybe it's spot minutes here and there, maybe it's how much time he's allowed to be on the floor in extended stretches, things like that. But I think Jaylen Adams will be generally fine, and I think he will play sooner than later. I think Gorge is just thinking of the worst case scenario where he's just had 2 straight games of just a problematic point guard play because they don't have their starting import point guard, the guy who's supposed to be the second best player on that team. So I think he's just thinking of the worst at that point. But I don't think Jaylen Adams' injury is as bad as he made it out to be, or as anyone is. From what I understand, it is a minor back injury. But again, a back injury is just something that you have to be careful with, in the same way that the Sydney Kings were super careful with all of the shoulder injuries they had last season. It's just an awkward part of the body. So from that perspective, I don't think it's a giant issue going forward. As in, to the point where it wouldn't surprise me if Jaylen Adams plays their next game. That's where we're at with the Jaylen Adams thing. Then that bleeds into just the general issues that this team has. I think scoring in the half court, they've just had some issues with that. They're not coming off as many on balls as they did over the first 2 games where Jaylen Adams was healthy. And a lot of this is just figuring out who should be on the floor, who the ball should be in whose hands, what combinations are right. And I think this team is still figuring that out. They picked up some wins along the way, so they do have some time to figure it out. But if they want to get to whatever their potential is, they've got to determine what their most ideal effective combinations are, because this thing can run away from them pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you just look at the overall numbers, and people that have listened to this long enough will know that if teams lose a close game, it's like one bucket here or there, and they lose 2 games by a total of 7 points. It can hurt because you don't want the losses to start piling up. So now they're 5-4. So I understand why there will be a lot of panic. I'm not quite there yet, but I am still sort of confused watching this team. I think they're fine. They've got the 4th offense, 4th defense, 3rd net rating at the moment. So, it's only just 9 games. But there's nothing that suggests they still won't be a top, 4 team in the league and perhaps higher. But you're right. The working through lineups and combinations and the offenses, it's troubling. I said after 3 games that the 3-point shooting was just completely out of control. And if I look at the lineups that we had in this Perth game and some of the offense they ran down the stretch, and then the same in the New Zealand game, I don't know what's going on with Cam Oliver. But when you have lineups that you've got like a Liafa and a Galloway, and then you put a Bruce out there, and then you got a Robertson trying to play the point guard down the stretch, and he can't really get into a half-court offense set because he might not be a natural point guard, or he's not a natural point guard. I don't understand when you're already losing one import, you can put out Xavier Cooks, but he's not touching the ball down the stretch either. There are going possessions where Isaiah Liafa is taking a fadeaway corner three. Now, he knocked one down against New Zealand, but Liafa took 14 shots. That was the most on this team against New Zealand. And it's been something that I just haven't been able to figure out all season long. The other night, it was Robertson that was, I don't know what he was doing. He was taking unbelievable shots without passing the ball, and they were tough shots. He's a rookie. Like, you've got star players on the floor. Like, I can't figure out the combinations. I can't figure out the shot selection, and I can't figure out why every single game with this Kings team, there is another role player that seems to be wanting to play hero ball. It's bizarre to watch.
There are times where if you watch this team, you'll watch Gorge closely, and he'll sometimes look onto the floor and think, "Who's on the floor right now?" Because it's not him who does the subs, right? The assistants do the subs, and this was the case with the Boomers as well, where I know he did the same thing, where he'd look on the floor and he'd think, "Wwhy isn't this player on right now?" So
well, I think he should get on top of that, to be honest, because
I think so.
It's bizarre. Yeah, I just, in the most important times in games, they will just randomly go, okay, now we're going to take off Cooks and Oliver at a really important stretch in the game, and you're just like, they can't be the decision making. Like, what is going on? They can play an extra few minutes.
Exactly. And I think Gorge is sometimes a bit baffled by it, right? So that's the first thing. The second is down the stretch. I think Tyler Robinson is a good basketball player, and I think he will be great.
Yeah, I think he'll be great. Yeah.
I don't know why Sean Bruce isn't on the floor at the end of games. If you don't have a point
why he's
guard,
not starting.
Just put. I can appreciate starting Tyler. The idea of starting two rookies and assuming you're going to have sustained success is very bold, but I appreciate it because starting doesn't mean everything. But finishing games, put your veteran point guard on the floor. Like Tyler Robertson is great, but Sean Bruce is someone who has been there before. He's been on the floor in big moments. He can get them into offense. He's played with Xavier Cooks for a decent amount of time. Put your veteran point guard on the floor. That seems like an obvious thing to me, and it's confusing that they're not doing that. I don't understand a lot of these Quatnoy minutes down the stretch. I know he had that game against was it against Perth a little bit ago where he hit a bunch of shots down the stretch, but I don't think he's the guy who you're going to have on the floor consistently in the fourth quarter. He's going to give you sustained success. Play Cam Oliver. I appreciate that he doesn't bring the same amount of gusto defensively that, let's say, Kelly Pepe does. But I think he gives you enough on both ends that I think he's obviously worth playing. I think he's too talented to be sitting on the bench. And then it was just a lot of effort things, especially in that Perth game where they gave up 24 O boards. Right, the Wildcats had 16 more field goal attempts. They won that game by 3 points. So you give another team 16 more field goal attempts than you, they're going to find 3 or 4 points out of that. You're going to lose the game. So that's largely an effort thing. I do wonder if the size of the Sydney Kings is something that's catching up to them a little bit. It was an issue going into the season. I wonder if that's something that they're thinking about right now. Again, not playing Cam Oliver down the stretch is not helpful in that regard. Kelly Pepe, for how much he hustles and how high his motor is, he's little. And so that stuff does matter when you're playing against teams that do have some size. I wrote like a whole list of things. No Tui down the stretch. I think he didn't play the last 15 minutes of that game. I thought he was their most effective defender on Parker Jackson Cartwright, just guarding the ball. And I think he was the same thing against Jordan Crawford. Earlier in a few weeks ago. So I don't understand him not being on the floor basically at all in the second half. I thought that confused me. I don't think they're getting enough offensively from Bukwal. I'm not sure what's happening there. I don't know if he's being put in positions to succeed. And then, I wrote Tyler over Bruce to end games is confusing to me. But that's all the Kings things. I think these are all marginal things. These are all like little decisions around the edges that I think can ultimately culminate in success. I think the pieces are there. I think the talent's there. I think things just need to be refined a little bit. This team, I don't think, knows what their combinations are. They don't know what's effective yet. And I think the Adams injury has just thrown them out of whack. I don't think they know which way to turn or which lever to pull at this point. I think they will figure it out, but there are some concerning signs. I'm not I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater at this point, though.
Me either. It feels just a little self-inflicted and just a little bizarre. Like I'm just sort of, as I'm watching games, I'm more confused watching the Kings than I am any other team at the moment. So the rebounding numbers on the offensive glass, defensive glass tell you that I don't think the size is really a problem for this team. And just play Cam Oliver a little bit more. I don't understand that. That's a strange one. And when you have a team that loses a couple games, you risk guys starting to get a little bit frustrated. I spoke about earlier in the season with Sean Bruce basically being benched when Jaylen Adams was still playing. Now he's in the rotation, but he's still not playing down the stretch. As you said, Cam Oliver's not playing down the stretch, and he doesn't look like he's happy about it, and I don't blame him for that. So if you just let it linger, you open the idea that guys can get a little frustrated in that locker room as well. So I'm not too concerned. I think they'll be fine. I think there's some pretty easy tweaks with the Kings. And the one thing I would say, a lot of chat about the MVP online, and people do their lists and all those types of things. We mentioned how good Pinder was in that game against the Kings, but Xavier Cook's in these two games. You want to talk about who is not the problem? It is that guy. He's having a great season. He's another one of those guys that people always question why you say Xavier Cooks is great. Just watch the game. I don't care if you hate the Sydney Kings. Watch the game. He's doing everything on both ends of the floor. He is basically running the offense. He's their best facilitator. He's getting on the offensive glass. He's damn near unstoppable getting downhill. Xavier Cooks is having a massive season. Unfortunately, missed a few free throws over the last few games, which is a setback. He started the season hot, but he's having a massive, massive year. And I certainly don't blame Xavier Cooks for the Kings losing the last two games.
I think Xavier Cooks is the best player in the league. I think he is a high level offensive player and a high level defensive player. I think he is the player on the floor who I feel the most trust with. If I was a fan of this team, I feel so much trust with Xavier Cooks on the floor. I don't know if we want to dive into the rabbit hole of MVP things. I saw you comment on the NBL's post, and I wholeheartedly agree with you that Jack White not being part of an MVP conversation at this point, considering how good Melbourne United is, how good their defense is, and how impactful he's been on both ends, that is sort of absurd to me. Again, I think Xavier Cooks is up there in these conversations too. I think we just get it. I think we get too enamored by points.
I would have Montrezl. So Montrezl was at the top.
Montrezl is part of the conversation, of course.
Absolutely. You got Harrell, you got Cooks. Cotton would have been there, but unfortunately he's going to miss some time now. And
you got Adelaide, Parker, you got Jack White.
Yeah, exactly. And even Illawarra, you would have said someone like Trey Cal might have been in the conversation. Now he's hurt, and we'll see where that sits, but that's a pretty even Illawarra team. I would have said in the first few weeks that DJ Vasiljevic was in there. The NBL list had Kendrick Davis there. I don't think you would have two Adelaide players in the top three. That's not the way I see it. I think we've maybe started to prove over the last few weeks that Montrezl might be the guy there. But there's a whole bunch of guys. So ultimately, I wasn't losing any sleep over it. But I did just finish watching Jack White. I just finished watching the Melbourne games, and I was like, damn, this guy, if he knocks down a few threes, he could have had 20 points, 20 rebounds. So it's something to work on for everyone, including us on this podcast. I feel like I was a bit fired up today.
I agree, and I like a fired up Kane. Can I read? So I was going through the box score for this Melbourne Cairns game. Yes. Jack White had 16 points, 13 rebounds, and 4 assists in 20 minutes.
I promise to never think about that game ever again.
Oh no! I'll never watch it again. I think Melbourne will even burn the tapes, right?
Yeah.
But for that line in that amount of time, being a plus 27 in those minutes, let's not get too enamored by points. Let's try to decipher impact, and I think the impact there is really clear.
No question, and I do feel for the Cairns Taipans right now. They're doing it tough, and they're undermanned, and that was a tough back-to-back, and between Harrell and then Jack White, they were able to take advantage of a team that isn't quite at their best, the Taipans, but they've been fun to watch. Hopefully they get some bodies back here over the next few weeks, because we have seen them be competitive earlier in the season. All right, let's wrap it up. Like I said, espn.com.au for the latest news. Watch Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops Thursday night. Olgun, get a couple of days rest in, and we'll see you for the show on Thursday night.
Can I say one more thing very quickly?
Yes.
I'm sorry, because I know you're wrapping up here.
Yes.
It's a small news thing, which I don't know if you know about, but I'll break this shortly, and it'll be public. I think the team will announce it shortly after me. Tommy Greer is stepping down as CEO of the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. So he plans to resign from that position. He'll stay in the position on background for a little bit as the season continues, and then he'll continue in an advisory role through June of 2025. Tommy Greer has been in that position effectively since 2018 when that franchise first became a thing. So basically from the very inception of the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, when they were just an idea, Tommy Greer was a part of that. He helped build them into what they are today, which is a team that has a ton of memberships, is now based out of the revamped State Basketball Center, and he played a big role in that. They've made semifinals. They've had mixed success on the court, but I think a ton of success off the court. I think especially rallying that Southeast Melbourne basketball community. So credit to Tommy Greer, who's going to step down from that role. He's played a big part of building one of the NBL's new franchises, and so credit to him for that. And it has to be stressed that this is him stepping down. He chose to remove himself from this position, and he'll play a role in helping the ownership find his successor as well. So I think Tommy Greer just needed a break from things. It's very stressful being in this sort of job for that amount of time. So he'll step down, find his successor, and the Phoenix will continue.
That is, a season of change continuing with Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. I'm sure we'll have more on that over the next few days, and there might be a few nervous people in NBL media. Olgun, is Tommy Greer a proven performer in front of the microphone?
He's such a good broadcaster. So,
hey,
holy shit!
He's old mate Liam. Get the Liam and Tommy show back on again. Who knows? We'll see. But he's a good man, and hasn't been an easy job over the last certainly few years with Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, and probably plenty of frustration with things, some bad luck, and just things not quite working out. So shout out to him and congratulations to him, and we'll see what happens here with the Phoenix over the next few weeks. New coach coming in as well. I'll wrap this up unless Olgun wants to interrupt again and bring one more news piece to the table. But if not, that'll do us. Olgun, you got to give me the heads up, bro. If you got some news to break, you just got to let me know.
I'm tempted to just bring it up. Like Emmett Nah is about to sign with the Bullets as an injury replacement player for Sam McDaniel.
Yes.
So he I don't think he's signed that contract yet, but he's agreed to that, so that'll get done at some point.
Good stuff. We'll see you on Thursday night. We'll see you on Thursday night, and we'll speak to everyone same time next week, the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Enjoy it all this weekend. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more stories to come.